up. Do you have a microphone and all the stuff that you need? Yeah, let's bring you over here. Okay, we've got it. Okay. I was like, he's not here. What are we going to do? Okay, so, whew, what a relief. I thought I was going to have to get up here and actually, do a lot of, I was going to do a dance or something. That was not going to be fun for anybody. So I am very excited to introduce Lejjy Gafour of Cult Food Science. Here's what we're going to be talking about next. So I think despite recent government support for academic exploration of cellular agriculture, and it has been increasing over time, it remains unclear if that traditional institutional support will keep up with the pace of private innovation. We see this in multiple sectors, but particularly here. So the question is, how can we roadmap the global pre-competitive infrastructure needed from discovery to commercialization, including tools, facilities, resources, training, education, workforce, to build a cell ag ecosystem that can both stand the test of time and the whims of the market, which is looking a little wild right now. So without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Lejjy to the stage.
Hello, nice to meet you all. Oh, where's my clicker? I should have asked this before. Oh, that's all right. Perfect, thank you. Yes, nice to speak with you all. And I really do want to talk about infrastructure, and when I was preparing about this talk, for those of you that know me, which is a handful of people in here, this is actually the first time I decided to not wear a suit for a presentation for the last 15 years. I had really strong indoctrination into a set of norms in office culture, and it served me really well. I had someone who's really, really good at it. They taught me everything from, oh, buy this navy suit. Here's the shoes you should wear. Here's what you should say and not say. And it did serve me well. I went from working in tiny retail stores to helping start my own businesses to working for universities. And arguably, a lot of that was actually because I followed the system that I was introduced to. Because sometimes elephants can actually be really beneficial, depending on who is working with them. So when I was preparing for this talk today, I was trying to get myself in the headspace and think, I should probably start with myself if I'm going to talk about breaking things. So I decided to start with something really small, which was just not wearing a suit and trying to be myself to try to bring it together. Because really, to change things that we see as a problem, we are going to have to break the rules in one way or another. And I'm from Cult Food Science, so I'm the CEO of Cult Food Science. So my viewpoint is different. I was a former founder of a startup called Future Fields, and Cult Food Science is a venture capital and IP technology development firm. So we both do the usual VC route, but then we also, working with our portfolio companies, end up with a lot of common themes and try to address that white space ourselves. And a lot of the time, the white space that we run across that is common between groups is actually not solutions, but common problems. And a lot of that time, it is related to infrastructure. And when I first started at Cult, I was thinking about, okay, how do we get things to move faster? Because at the time, maybe a little bit different now, access to capital was not a problem for companies. So how do we invest in and support the best companies moving as quickly as possible? Because it wasn't really related to how much cash they had. What were the other problems, and what were we seeing were the other problems at the time. And one thing that kept coming up over and over again was that shared patterns between the companies were few and very far between. And that we would talk with a new startup, whether it was a team of 2 people or even some that are more experienced, doing the same thing over and over when we'd heard it maybe a few months before. And it wasn't because they weren't trying as hard as they could. It's because they all had to start from the same place. They couldn't access a lot of the foundational steps that you need to go through to really make a strong company. And what this really turned into, and actually got in the way of some investments, is seeing repeated resources, wasted resources, and duplicating effort, which is really what it comes down to. And while I'm talking about technology and cell ag, it can be very dangerous to repeat the same thing over and over again, especially if you're repeating the wrong thing and you might not know it. And I really like an example from here in the New York area, actually, about overpasses, which I was surprised to learn, which is something that seems pretty tame. From the 1920s to the 70s, there's apparently a set of really short overpasses out by Long Island. And it's not something you would think about, but as I discovered, those were designed to be purposely short to prevent a particular group of people, those who might take buses, from being able to get to these other areas. And it was one person who made this design choice very silently that then just continued to happen. And the same thing happens with technology, and the same thing, unfortunately, also happens with us. Whether it's trying to create a startup, or even on the VC side, such as myself, you go through the same patterns, often not questioning, are they good or not? And reiterating a bit, what does this really mean is how do we solve that? How do we keep from new companies starting from zero every single time? How do we support this faster to prevent those same mistakes that we might not even know that we're making? So what do we do about it? So the challenge I would like to bring forward to everyone in the industry is really about beginning to share those foundational frameworks, data, infrastructure, performance data to actually help the industry grow and accelerate. And this is very hard to do because as a startup, you are very much encouraged to keep secrets because it can turn into capital. And same thing from a VC perspective, trying to work with institutions. There's always the big question of IP. So how I think we can break that is beginning to actually openly share the techniques, the knowledge, and the systems that we come up with as a group for the benefit of all of us. And to be more specific, when I talk about sharing, that is things all the way from common infrastructure, like cell banks, how we're going to figure out things with supply chain, what are common design patterns for particular types of products, data and traceability, materials handling, safety, regulatory. It's stuff that we need to share more openly between each other if we really want to see things move faster. And I really believe the current ecosystem is not incentivized to do so, speaking from personal experience. And as I mentioned before, on the academic side, very important, publications are important, but if you're going to start a company and you start to try to pull IP away from perhaps where you were studying at, it can immediately become a barrier. The first question that I still ask new companies is, do you own your IP or not fully? Or does someone else own it? And as I mentioned before, on the startup side, you're still very much encouraged, you pretty much have to keep everything as black box as possible. And this really is about speed. I believe that we do not have enough time if we don't start to work together a bit more in this direction. Last estimate I checked is that there is still an expected 12% increase in population by 2050, which might translate to reducing an extra 50% needed of agricultural productivity. And I do not believe we are going to get that from our current systems, which really rings home to me why everything we're talking about today is so important. But although I am challenging everyone else, it wouldn't be fair to me, speaking of breaking rules, if we didn't do something ourselves. So with the help of New Harvest, as of right now, actually, we're launching a novel network called Open Cellular Agriculture, which is live right now. If you go to opencellag.com, and the first project that we are attempting to support is actually a cell bank and everything that comes with it, because that is a common starting step for every company in this space, is access, accessibility, and affordability to cells and everything that comes with it. Because really, if we want to start thinking in new ways of how to move things faster, even if it means breaking some rules, we have to change how we're thinking about IP and ownership today and really make that source to open push. And if you want to see this work to continue to happen, I will also echo the call to donate to New Harvest, and let's work together to make more of our techniques and technologies open source. Thank you. I should also add, I sped it up a little bit because we have a special guest.
Hi. Okay, well, the next few minutes we're going to do a Q&A, so this is where those Slido skills are going to come in handy. If you have any burning questions for Lejjy about some of the topics that he just covered, you know the drill. Pull out your phone, scan the QR code, pop some questions up here, and as the questions are populating, I'll ask some of them, but I'm going to start with some of my own selfishly because I'm standing up here with you. I am really interested in sort of diving more into your perspective now that you've stood on sort of both sides of this. So you talk a little bit about your experience of being a founder in the space and facing the challenges from that end. Now you're sitting on the other side in the position of funder and trying to figure out, okay, I've got not just my company, but all of these companies. What do they all need? How has that helped shape your perspective? The founding journey shaped your perspective now that you're sitting on sort of the funder side of the table?
Yes, I would say there are definitely techniques and technologies and things that companies need that from a, we'll say, VC perspective, you wouldn't necessarily actually want to back.
Yeah.
But it's actually still necessary. That is probably the biggest thing, because maybe if you do it, you might make a couple $1 million. It could be sustainable, but it's not really going to hit that big return that you're looking for. But companies still need to do it.
Mm-hmm. And so this sort of brings up a question that I think we'll grapple with in a few ways over the course of the conference, but sort of teasing out, where do we still need foundational science, right? And this is one of the places where New Harvest as an org has really shined. Where do we need engineering, right? So what are the engineering challenges? Okay, we figured out a lot of the foundational science. Now we have engineering challenges and scale and deployment challenges, and that is where venture capital becomes catalytic. Do you think we actually, like part of what you called out is sort of this idea of road mapping. Do you have a sense of what that roadmap looks like today?
To a degree, but I will actually say that there's likely solutions that some private companies have actually solved that could actually support a lot of the new startups.
Yeah.
And that is really the hard part is, do we want to keep guessing at things that might already have a solution, or even more importantly, groups might already know the wrong answer.
Yeah.
And we could just be repeating it. But in terms of the roadmap, everything is up for grabs, but it is really about starting at a lot of the fundamental stages that will help companies scale, especially when they're brand new, to be able to get the traction they need to get that funding later on.
Yeah. That makes sense. I'm going to not take up the whole time. I'm going to come over here so I can better see the audience questions. The top one up here asks, what are the plans or details of the cell bank? What can you share with us?
Well, I'm going to cheat on that one and say that I have a booth here for 2 days. So if you want to know more, you're going to have to come talk to me.
Oh, come on. Okay, well, I mean, that's fair. That's fair. And actually, it'll give you the opportunity to sort of harass him a little bit and really get into the details, because we may not have enough time to do that up here on the stage. Okay, that's fair. I kind of want to push you on that, but I'll do it at your booth later as you ask. Okay, this one I'm really interested in. I come from a background in open source technology myself, and we started a company that was open source foundationally. The hardware, the software, every single part of it was open source. It was actually hard, but we built a unicorn, so there are business models in open tech development. So how do you incentivize the tech developers to share? I mean, particularly now that things are, you know, sort of in a silo, it both feels like this is necessary to scale to the scale of the problem, and it also feels like, as you rightly pointed out, the entire system that we've built is sort of set up to disincentivize that kind of open sharing. So is there, what is the how here? What do you think is one of the, or a handful of the first things we can do to start making moves in that direction?
Yes, yeah, you kind of touched on it. The first thing is definitely we shouldn't punish them for sharing where we can, which is dangerous to do, and it happens. And then the second thing is to actually take the time to identify within whatever you're working on what aspects of that are actually genuinely useful to other parties, and actually might not be a key part of your business model, that it might even help if other people also do that. So it's not just you who's working on it, and it really is those two things that you need to identify.
Okay. I think that makes sense. I think the next one that I'm already thinking about is, so this is similar to the earlier question, but it's more specific. They're asking, how will the Open Cell Ag Bank differ from existing nonprofit bank providers?
That is a very fair question. There are some key challenges with what is currently available. I won't note ATCC specifically, but in general, for companies that I have worked with, there can be challenges even on the nonprofit cell banks with how licensing is actually considered and used, specifically when it comes to developing commercial purposes. And that's really where the core challenge to be addressed is having access to it where it is open, not just for companies, but also for researchers, and really address, hey, you can use this for commercial purposes and build it upon it effectively.
I think in the same vein, some folks are curious about what are sort of we're building an ecosystem, right? And so what are the places that are unique to Open Cell Ag, as opposed to what do you think are some of the places that are unique to New Harvest? And I'm interested in how those can kind of cooperate together. So leveraging the community and infrastructure that New Harvest built and vice versa.
Oh, yes. Open Cell Ag is headless. So it is organizations working together towards the same aims. So it is designed to be fully complementary and not restrictive at all. It really is about trying to bring together groups that want to see the same things happen, to find better ways to coordinate it. But it is headless in itself, more of an initiative than a formal group.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. What do you want us to do? How do we help?
Well, from the VC side, such as myself, I do think a lot about how do I not accidentally punish investments, and what do they actually need, regardless of if it doesn't directly fit the model or not. They're really important, because those small little things might be inconsequential to us at scale, but it can mean the world to the companies. And on the other side of it, for everyone else is really just seeking and figuring out how to be more open, just in general, and that not every interaction is about competitiveness at this stage. I know that we want to be, but we really do have to identify those things that will be mutually beneficial for the entire industry, because if those are available, we get to make more money too, and not just do we want to what we have to do, which is help the planet.
Yeah. This idea of what is the word that people use sometimes? I think people say co-opetition. That's not a real word. But that's sort of the thing that you're talking about is it's like the competitive dynamics are actually helpful in advancing the field, but then without enough cooperation, it starts to become a gating factor. And so finding that balance is actually really challenging. I don't think we're going to solve it on this stage today, but this is something that we have to think a lot about.
Yes, yeah, and this is only a rough example, but my background, a lot of it being in computing and software, is how much is what is built commercially on what are realistically open source foundations. At the time, when a lot of stuff is being worked on, there's no way you could foresee the future of the impact that having those common foundations for people to build businesses on would turn into is what is we're seeing today, and CellAg just doesn't have that yet. There is no Linux, to use a rough example, for CellAg to build on top of.
Yeah. I feel like this is a question kind of aimed at both of us. But the question is from the VC perspective, would you fund a company that shares its IP? And I think there's another one that's related, which is like, do you have companies that have shared IP?
Yes and yes. Gain for details, come find me after, since it can be a very long rant. But yes, so business models are super important because if all you're depending on is that you happen to be the only person that knows this one thing, that isn't necessarily going to help you win with your customers or every other infinite number of things that you need to have in line with a business. So IP is just a small part of it. And you can strategically share things, not even necessarily all of it, that can still support the field, but still have a strong business model behind it.
What does that sharing look like for your companies? I'm going to poke on this a little bit. Is it licensing? Is it, is it revenue sharing? What is that? What are some of the models that you've seen that actually work here?
It varies depending on who it is, and a lot of the time how they even approach it. And how the technology even works, what makes it effective, what is their business model behind it. So there is actually multiple ways to move forward with it.
Yeah. I think one of the ways that I think about this is we're really talking about changing whole systems. And so if you approach it from the systems level, you start to think about, industry groups, right? You start to think about, and we see this emerging in other fields, particularly across the climate space. And I do think about cellular agriculture as a climate technology, but it's what are the places where people don't have to, as you rightly pointed out in your talk, reinvent the wheel over and over from scratch. We've seen a lot of that in platform biology. I think one of the amazing sponsors of New Harvest, Ginkgo, has shown sort of the strength of that platform model, building and sharing infrastructure. And so I think there's a lot there, and we're going to get into a lot more of it as we go. All right, what do you wish I'd asked you that I didn't yet? What do you wish we were asking you? I want to let you have the last word in that way.
Well, the question that I always like to be asked is, how can we help?
Yeah.
I will do another plug for supporting New Harvest specifically, because actually, kind of getting to one of the questions that was on there, but it's not there anymore. As like a private group, if I'm supporting things, I have to be accountable to my stakeholders. So if I'm starting from a fully private lens, it can tend to stick that way, which is why being able to work with groups like New Harvest and why supporting them is so important, is to be able to create those avenues where I can both make competitive businesses, competitive decisions, but then also work my way to making it as freely as available as possible and having those partners with it. So if anyone wants to partner up to make more of those things happen, those are the questions and things I want to be asked.
Amazing. Lejjy, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Lejjy has given us a lot to think about and a lot to chew on. Fortunately, it's almost already time for our first coffee break. So before we get into that, I'm going to do a thing that I really should have done at the beginning. I am really not doing a great job at this MC thing, which is to thank the people that actually made the conference possible. So as Isha pointed out, while New Harvest does have sponsors, those sponsors do not pay for stage time. So the conference is still independently organized, independently run. New Harvest takes feedback from the community and responses from you and puts together this program, and that is not based on who gives them money. However, we very much appreciate the money, and we appreciate the support. So the conference was made possible thanks to New Lab, as I mentioned just recently, Ginkgo Bioworks, Compassion in World Farming, Agronomics, Cult Food Science, thank you, Lejjy, Stray Dog Institute, International Flavors and Fragrances, Aleph Farms, and Vow Food. So those are our sponsors today. Really huge, huge thank you for supporting New Harvest. I think, okay, so the next thing that's gonna happen is a coffee break. I think I'm supposed to tell you to come back here at 11:30 sharp. But before that happens, we have a special announcement. So we're here in New York. We love New York. And Mayor Eric Adams is here today. He's going to be right upstairs during the coffee break. And he is going to try a bagel with perfect day cream cheese and wild type salmon. So big round of applause. We're very excited. We're excited that our we're excited that our very own mayor is actually going to get a chance to try some of the products and some of the progress from this field. So, very exciting. You are free to go. You're free to go. Grab some coffee, but come back at 11:30. Okay? We're going to be talking about scale up.